Good afternoon. My name is David Lamb, and I'm with the Soil Health Institute. And I want to welcome you to today's Healthy Soil Farmer Showcase. Over the last 7 weeks, if you've been participating, you've heard presentations from a number of farmers, cotton soil health farmers from a number of states. And we've heard them talk about challenges of implementing a soil health management system when you're raising cotton. But you can see from some of the slides or the pictures I have up here, there's great success being found out there. We've heard them talking about how they plan into these heavy cover crops, the benefits of a system that keeps the residue on the surface and traps moisture and controls erosion and cools the soil. We've also heard them talk a lot about how the control helps reduce pest problems, especially a lot of with the Palmer amaranth pigweed, that type of issue. But today's session, we're going to shift it a little bit, and we're going to hear more from the industry side. What today's topic is why soil health is important to the future of U.S. cotton. And I've listed our presenters, and we'll go let them introduce themselves as I get done with my little introduction here. But again, we're focusing on what's the connection between soil health, regenerative ag, and the cotton industry as a whole. This Healthy Soil Farmer Showcase has been a part of the Healthy Soils for Sustainable Cotton project. Is something that was a joint effort between the Soil Health Institute in partnership with Wrangler Jeans and the Walmart Foundation itself. So this is our third year in the project. The project's goal in itself was more to help implement and encourage the adoption of soil health management systems. Those of you who have not necessarily know who the Soil Health Institute is, we were founded 4, 5, 6 years ago. And the primary purpose of the Institute is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of the soil through scientific research and advancement. So, when you first started down this path of soil health, there's so many people said, where's the science? Where's the science? How do you prove it? And the Soil Health Institute is trying to take the lead on how we can document this, find where the research is being done, and make it available for those out there that are interested. The project itself doesn't happen just by chance. It takes support. And I just really want to recognize our two funders on this with Wrangler and the Walmart Foundation. We appreciate their support financially and also them participating in today's webinar series. Again, as I mentioned, the key objectives of the project itself was to increase the adoption of soil health management systems by cotton producers. And then the second part of it is to quantify what are the benefits, and not only from a production side, economic side, but what also are the environmental benefits that we can document that cotton producers would be providing once they start to implement a system that includes those practices that are necessary to improve soil function across the country. This is the last one in a series of 8. The previous 7 have been recorded and are made available for replay off of the Soil Health Institute's YouTube channel. This one will be made available next week. So if you got somebody who didn't get a chance to participate, we'll be able to tune in next week. And we've actually gotten quite a bit of participation through the replay system there. I always like to conclude my opening comments by reminding folks when we talk about soil health, this is what we're talking about. Soil health is continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And we're talking about for food and fiber production. We're not talking about for building roads and highways. It's a totally different soil topic. We hope farmers we can convey to our farmers the idea that we want sustainability. That's what the continued capacity. We're not talking 2 years, 3 years down the road. We want a system that's 50, 60, 100 years down the road. It helps to improve those functions necessary for food and fiber production. We hope to help farmers understand that what the soil beneath their feet is a living ecosystem. There's life there. And that living ecosystem provides those functions necessary for them to grow their crop, whether it be cotton, corn, or what have you. What are those functions necessary? We expect our soils to cycle nutrients. That's really a key point. Most producers don't understand that most of the fertilizer put on in any given year does not end up in that year's crop. It goes through a biological process. We expect our soils to allow water to infiltrate and then give it back up at those critical times of year when water is necessary for production. We also hope our soils will filter and buffer out pollutants, break down those products that we apply so we don't have off-site problems down the road. And the big key here, we expect our soils to provide that physical stability and support. We got to be able to harvest the crop. It doesn't do us good to raise 3-bale cotton if we can't get it out in the field, folks. That's a really fundamental soil function necessary for this for agriculture to survive. And the last two there, we don't really think about it, but soil is habitat. And whether you, as a producer, recognize or not, you dictate a lot of what's going on in the soil by the management activities you select to do. You can see the slide there. Most healthy soils have a very healthy, robust earthworm populations that come back. And that's because we created those conditions that allow those organisms to come back and thrive and do those things that are necessary to support agriculture. And 90% of these soil functions are driven by or mediated by the soil ecosystem, the soil microbes, and other organisms that live within the soil. How do farmers do this? You've heard them over the last 7 weeks. We've heard them talk about how they're minimizing disturbance and they maximize cover. Minimizing disturbance means they've gone to like a no-till system or a reduced tillage system. Maximizing cover, they've adopted cover crops into their system or other high residue crops. We had low residue crops. This provides a habitat for microbes. It also provides protection for soil aggregates. And also to a person, every one of our soil health producers talks about how they've increased soil organic matter in their fields. And the other two principles are maximizing living roots and maximizing diversity. We look outside, photosynthesis takes place every day when the sun takes shining out there. I'm in North Carolina. I've had to mow my lawn twice already. So that tells me something's going on with that sunlight. So if we can keep a root in the ground year round or as long as possible, that helps provide that connection between the sun and the soil. And then getting some diversity in there. A lot of our commodity crop rotations are pretty simplistic, cotton, peanuts in Georgia. That's a pretty common rotation. That's not a very diverse rotation. How can we get more diversity in there? Well, we can include cover crops and livestock and those kinds of things. That feeds biology in the soil. So before we get going and introduce our first speaker, those of you that are interested in asking questions, we're going to be answering them along the way. Down at the bottom, there's a Q&A box. You can just type it in. And if you want to send it anonymously, you can select that. Otherwise, it'll show up your name. And we'll be looking at those questions and getting our speakers to answer those as we go along. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jesse Daystar, who is with Cotton Inc., and he's involved with their sustainability effort there. And Jesse, I'm going to let you give a little more background on yourself and take it away.
Well, great. Thanks, David, for the introduction on all that. It's always good to remind yourself of where we are. My name is Jesse Daystar. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer at Cotton Incorporated, and I lead the sustainability division there, helping improve the sustainability across the cotton supply chain. That certainly starts in the soil here, what we're talking about today, but then doesn't end there. It goes all the way through growing the cotton, using it in terms of making clothing, how we can be more sustainable there, more efficient, how we can actually use our clothing, wear it, and perhaps wash it less, be more sustainable. And ultimately, at the end of life, how can we help that process be more sustainable and capture more carbon? So we're taking a holistic view of all of this to ultimately improve the demand and profitability of cotton through promotion and research, particularly sustainability research. That has been a growing area where brands as well as consumers are really focusing on. And this first part of this presentation will really focus on why sustainability is important to these audiences. Why, what's the value, when we've already talked about the value to the agronomic systems and to an extent the environmental systems, but in terms of access to market and the future of the cotton industry, why sustainability is indeed important. And Dr. Gary Adams will follow me in describing a new program which we hope will help the cotton industry progress towards increasing value and improving opportunities for U.S. cotton producers. So with that, I'll start to kick this off. All right, so the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, Dr. Gary Adams will go into detail, and sort of here's the run up to that, why it's important, why now. So you've probably been seeing the news, and sustainability or environmental issues has certainly been increasing in terms of popularity of just what you see out there. One of my favorites, and also one of my least favorites at the same time, is plastic pollution down the bottom left-hand corner there. That has been, all over the news, and there's been bans at a national level as well as state level. So plastic pollution has been a big pushback. Luckily, cotton is made not out of plastic, it's made out of a plant and biodegrades, where polyester, the main competitor to cotton, actually is plastic itself. So that's actually a huge advantage for cotton, and we're capitalizing on that, showing how cotton biodegrades and polyester actually does not. So that's been a big area of focus and continues to be. But beyond that, it's more broad, just general waste and pollution, which certainly all textile processing and production of anything is going to create some environmental impact. And product labeling around sustainability certainly has been increasing, and consumers want to know what's in their product. Is it safe? Was it responsibly produced? And how can they be an actor in this to ultimately reduce their impact and improve the world, if possible, for future generations to come? Cotton Incorporated actually did some research to better understand what are the sentiments of Generation Z people, consumers, to be. And when we asked them what their priorities and the most important challenges of their time are, climate change, pollution, and too much waste were three sustainability related topics right there at the top of the list. So clearly that emerging class of purchasers, they're just now turning 18 and really starting to get their finances to actually start buying, clothing and cotton. It certainly matters to them, and it's going to continue to matter into the future. Beyond just the consumers that are certainly important, there's other things that are happening at a big scale, such as EU textile regulations. First, I mentioned plastic pollution. They've first really started to regulate that over the past few years in terms of single-use plastics, and now they've turned their sights to textiles. And what that means is there's going to be sustainability type labels potentially on products, and they're going to dictate what is and what is not acceptable at some level. We need to make sure that US cotton and cotton at large is viewed in a way that is acceptable, that it is sustainable, and that we are doing what we can to improve at an environmental level, but also our reputation. Make sure that we actually are telling the story about what we're doing, because that's really important to not only be sustainable as possible, but make sure the world is understanding that we're documenting that and telling that to the supply chain. And that's something that we have to really focus on. So brands and retailers, they're certainly under pressure, both from consumers, from the governments, as well as NGOs. And there's recently a lot of different things in the headlines, maybe by NGOs showing issues around certain brands or opportunities to improve. So they're under a lot of pressure to take some action as far as to how they can create a strategy to have progress and deliver on that strategy to make sure their stakeholders are well represented, as well as to have that real proof that they're getting better through time for the consumers. So the good news is US cotton producers has a consistent track record of getting better and continuous improvement through time. Over the last 35 years, you can see here that we've improved remarkably on many indicators, most notably maybe water, 82% reduction, as well as greenhouse gas emissions at 30%. So clearly we have gotten a lot better through time, and that's not just, again, out of nowhere. We've worked very hard at this by implementing the best practices possible through research from organizations like our own and maybe Soil Health Institute, taking the whole industry to get better through time. And we continue to do this into the future. So we have a good track record, and I mentioned greenhouse gas emissions I'm gonna focus in a little bit more on that over the next few slides. We've gotten 30% better over the last 35 years. While brands are now making pledges to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by generally somewhere in that range of 30 to 40%, or even to be net negative or net zero, meaning that they have no emissions. So they're really making aggressive climate targets that either require them to reduce their emissions at least, or reduce their emissions and put more carbon in the ground, which then comes back to soil health and soil carbon, which is another conversation of how all this and sustainability does really relate back to the ground and the soil health. It's not only we have to reduce our emissions as operations, but perhaps even put more carbon in the ground. So as an example, Ralph Lauren, Fruit of the Loom, Adidas, amongst many other brands such as Levi's, have made strong commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And they're not just far out commitments. Certainly some are like really further out in the future. But for example, Levi's by 2025 is going to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. And a lot of that's actually going to come, or a good portion is going to come from the cotton production arena. So luckily, the U.S. cotton industry has a goal as well of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions by 39%. And just to kind of put this out there, the other competitors to cotton, for example, Lenzing and Eastman Chemical, they also create fibers that are kind of more natural-ish and also kind of have that feel of cotton. They have also goals to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. So we have to really be competitive in this space and deliver on what we've set to accomplish. So we have that, again, 39% reduction in greenhouse gas emission goal by 2025. We have additional goals beyond that, however. For example, water use by 18%, energy reduction by 15%, reduce soil loss per acre, increase our yields or our efficiency on the land, and ultimately improve soil carbon, which again, highly related back to that soil health, that soil carbon, putting carbon in the ground, improving the soil, which will again help, as you have seen over the past several presentations, if you've been watching these, can really improve the other indicators. By improving the soil health, you can be more efficient with your water. You might be able to reduce your energy and ultimately your greenhouse gas emissions. So when you look at this through time, we didn't just pick a number out of the air. We considered multiple things. First, we looked at the trend line through time. You can see here that we have been reducing our greenhouse gas emissions through time through innovation in yields, precision agriculture, improving our practices on the farm. Certainly that does help. But that red dot and that circle there really is a bit more aggressive than the trend line. And that needs to be that way because the industry is asking, what are you doing above and beyond what you have done? That's really their ask. You have to go above and beyond. And we do think that we can get there. We think that through improving yield and improving nitrogen use efficiency, as well as capturing carbon in the ground through cover crops and reduced tillage, as we've all been talking about on these presentations, there's a real opportunity for agriculture to do this and for cotton to really reduce greenhouse gas emissions and deliver on a real need for brands, consumers in the world. And one yet more opportunity is still sort of emerging, but carbon markets. It could be a large opportunity for cotton growers. We've talked about this to some extent on these presentations. It's certainly still the Wild West, a lot of new emerging markets coming online, a lot of unknowns. At Cotton Incorporated, we're hoping to and working towards creating some information to hopefully be a broker of knowledge around this area, helping try some of these markets out with some growers to see if it fits, because I think that we're going to have to do some tailoring, iron out some bugs, and make sure that it works for the grower and that we're reducing risk where possible for the grower, as well as making a product, a carbon product, that's going to provide be needed by the brand. So make sure we have a good product all around, that we have minimized risk. So we're working in that space. A lot more to come here, but there certainly is a notable opportunity for cotton growers to put carbon in the ground and perhaps even be paid for it. So certainly brands have commitments to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, and they're pretty aggressive around that. The second most thing, or the thing right next to that really, is commitments to sourcing sustainable cotton. And I say sustainable probably with some air quotes. Sustainably sourced is another way to say it. Essentially what that means for the majority of brands is that cotton is from a sustainability program, most commonly. There's several out there, such as the Better Cotton Initiative you may have heard of, or the new one which we have created in the United States, the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol. So, for example, there's Target by 2022, which happens to be just next year, wants to have 100% sustainably sourced cotton. And if it's not sustainably sourced, they have indicated that they cannot purchase it. So to have access and sell U.S. cotton to these brands, we have to have an option for sustainably sourced cotton. And I want to remind everybody too, it's not only that we have to show that we are responsible producers and actually do that on the farm, but we have to communicate that information to the supply chain. It's essentially, you got to create your cotton as well as document aspects of sustainability that you are doing and pass that information along the supply chain, because that's what they really have to prove in order to be able to save these types of commitments and to meet their goals. So it's not just Target and not these brands, but Levi's, Wrangler, Marks and Spencer's, Ralph Lauren. lot of brands have made these commitments, and it's important that the U.S. has an ability to sell to these consumers of cotton. Otherwise, we'll be cut out of the market, and that's not good for business. So that's why it was important that the industry came together to rally behind a program that's designed for U.S. producers, that works with the technologies we have, the ways in which we grow cotton in the United States, the high level of technology adoption, and the high level of regulation and worker safety protocols that are in place from the U.S. government. We created something that was not redundant and is as streamlined as possible. And that was our goal, to preserve our market and to make sure that cotton has a future for production and for business. So the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, just a very brief overview of that, and Dr. Gary Adams will go in more detail. But essentially what it is, you have to essentially, as a grower, you would enroll in it, of course, voluntary. And once you've done that, you do a checklist of practices, such as, do you use cover crops? Do you follow the laws and regulations around various items? What type of irrigation systems, or do you irrigate? So just a pretty quick questionnaire. And then something called a field print calculator. And what that is a on-the-field assessment from Field to Market, the Alliance for Sustainable Agriculture, that will determine things such as how much soil is coming off your field. And as a grower, if you see that you're above average and it benchmarks your own field and your own situation against an average, both maybe regional, state, and national, you can see if you're maybe losing more soil or less efficient with your water than your neighbors, than your peers. And that can be something that you could potentially learn from, not only to reduce your impacts, but maybe more importantly, or equally as importantly, improve your operation to have more profitability. So it's not only environmental sustainability, it certainly can be economic sustainability. And once you've completed that, there is an aspect of independent verification just to make sure the data has been entered accuracy. We are seeing, unit issues, or just to make sure things really do check out. And that'll be part of it as well. And ultimately, this program is aimed at helping the U.S. cotton industry meet the 10-year sustainability goals. We hope that this program can help us get better faster, adopt more practices, and reduce our impacts, helping us meet our 10-year sustainability goals, which ultimately helps meet the brand sustainability goals well, and increase the trust in U.S. cotton, lower that brand risk, and ultimately lower our environmental impacts, which is what we're here to do. So that's kind of the big nutshell, big picture of why it's important, why we've created this, and why it's going to be here in the future, and it's a good opportunity for cotton growers.
Okay, Jesse.
Yep.
There are a couple questions come in. Can you explain to the producers the connection between the UN or the EU textile regulations and why that would affect me down in South Georgia?
That's a fair question. Yeah, so I think that when you look at a global scale, there's certainly markets all over the world. And you look at the major markets, and as most cotton producers are aware, we export our cotton, and then we buy cotton from the world and clothing. And certainly US is, the major market, but the EU is also a major market. So if we, as an industry, can no longer sell cotton that's going into the EU, that could potentially hurt price in the long term. That could be a problem. And essentially, if brands recognize that if I have a business presence in the EU, I have to source cotton that isn't from the United States. They're gonna have to source cotton from other programs in other areas. And that's not what we want. We want to have brands want US cotton for not only the quality and all the reasons they always have wanted it, but also for the reasons of sustainability. And that's important for a long-term viability of the U.S. cotton industry.
Okay, one more question before we move on here. The whole idea of connecting, you mentioned something about the reusing cotton products, and that's kind of tricked some interest there. So I give you my T-shirt back, and you can do something with that, or what's the thought process there?
Great question. I actually didn't dive too far into that, but there is a lot of opportunity and a lot of interest in what we call circular systems or circular economy. And that idea is using our resources in a more circular manner. Luckily, cotton has a lot of opportunities in this space. I mean, certainly there is an opportunity, though I like to think not a terrifically great opportunity, but there is an opportunity to turn cotton clothing back into cotton clothing. but technically it's challenging financially. It's also very challenging and doesn't generally make sense. But there's a lot of opportunities to take clothing and turn it into other products that are not cotton clothing. For example, the Cotton Incorporated Blue Jeans Go Green program takes jeans from consumers, they mail them in, we collect them, and then we process them into insulation that ultimately ends up in the wall. So not only are we reducing waste in the landfill, we're creating a product that's capturing carbon that was once in the atmosphere as CO2, putting it in the walls, helping a building be more efficient, all the while creating value in really growing a cotton that has benefits and ultimately has long-term viability and is circular. So we're really looking at a wide range of opportunities to make sure that cotton fits in a circular system, and one that definitely considers that we need to keep producing cotton and we need to keep on using that raw material that came from the environment for good purposes. And maybe even consider, can we recycle clothing, cotton clothing, back into soil, which then we grow our crops. That's another way, because cotton is a plant. It's generally designed to be circular within the environmental systems, unlike the competitor as polyester. So I think we have a lot of opportunities, and we're really starting to explore that. We actually have a good graphic and a statement around that in cottonworks.com. If anybody would like to see that, there's a good graphic there that really dives into this in more detail.
Okay. And Jesse, we appreciate you hanging around, because there are a couple other questions, but I think it might be good for group discussion. So we want to stop sharing your screen. And if folks want a copy of the Pathways to Progress, I know I found one by Googling it, and I got a PDF file, and it's a great publication that really does a good job of outlining what cotton does. And maybe Gary can answer that question right off the. Has any other industry put forth a publication like that that says this is where we want to be in 10 years related to cotton in the country? I think that's a kudos to you all there. So our next presenter is going to be Dr. Gary Adams, and he's with the National Cotton Council. He's the president, and if he wants to brag on himself a little more, I'll let him do that as he takes over sharing his screen, and he's going to talk more about this Cotton Trust Protocol, because as Jesse, the question came up when you were talking is the word, I wrote down the word truth in labeling. And I think maybe this might be able to provide some truth in labeling, and when people start to talk about that. So
very good. I'll let Gary take the hard questions, no problem.
Okay, go ahead, Gary.
All right, thank you, David, and good afternoon to everyone. As David said, I'm Gary Adams. I am president of the National Cotton Council, also heavily involved in launching the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, and I appreciate Jesse's introduction and background about some of the challenges that we face in the global textile industry. And we see the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, which is an industry-wide effort. And when I say that, it's been through the efforts of staff at Cotton Incorporated, Cotton Council International, Cotton Board, and National Cotton Council, both through work, time, and money to really try to bring this program into existence and hopefully see it grow as we go forward. And Jesse talked about a lot of the pressures that we're dealing with in terms of trying to drive continuous improvement, trying to make sure we meet the demands of our customers for U.S. cotton. And I think that's an objective of the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol, and it will also, we believe, help producers improve more quickly and reduce that environmental footprint. I encourage anyone to go to the website of the Trust Protocol, which is trustuscotton.org, and get a better understanding of the various components of the protocol. Also, for somebody who is either a cotton producer or somebody in the cotton value chain, it's an opportunity to enroll in the program. So please check that out. And speaking of enrollment, let me start with a few words about the participation that we have by cotton farmers in the United States. We started this with the 2019 crop in what we refer to as really a pilot phase, where we had approximately 300 producers that were enrolled in the program. We now have worked our way through the enrollment process for the 2020 crop. We had approximately 600 producers that were in process. Some of those are still finishing up some of the requirements, but that gives you some perspective of the number of producers that we've been able to engage in this program. And now, once we move into April, we'll be officially switching over and focusing on enrollment for the 2021 crop. And when we talk about enrollment for any crop year and what the requirements are for participant growers. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. Jesse gave you a flavor of the major components of grower participation. One is a self-assessment of management practices, best management practices. The second major component is a participation in the field to market field print platform. That's essentially a field level analysis of a representative sample of the producer's cotton fields. There's signing a statement of commitment, also the possibility of being selected for an independent verification, and then they'll also collect data on where the producer gens and who markets their cotton. And I would say too, all of this information is treated in the most confidential manner. In terms of individual grower information, the grower is going to be the only one to see that unless there is some type of protocol administrator that is reviewing or for independent verification, but it does not get released. Individual producer results do not get released to the public. When we talk about data from the program, it's going to be data that we talk about in aggregate, and so that we can use that data, the data you provide us, to tell U.S. cotton sustainability story. Kind of going back to the self-assessment questionnaire, we have 9 categories, very appropriate that the first category in that grid of choices you see is soil health. Those 9 categories cover approximately 120 questions. Over the course of the development of this program, we have regionalized the questions somewhat and also separated those questions by irrigated, non-irrigated practices. There are certain practices that are required, and on those required questions, the one choice is that I am in compliance. Then there are practices that we refer to as recommended practices, and on those practices, there are a choice of 4 answers. They do now in most of my fields. I am implementing on 1 or more of my fields. I will consider in the next 3 years or not appropriate for my farming operation. And I would add too on the required questions, those are generally the questions regarding practices that would be necessary for a producer to be in compliance with, say, conservation requirements, conservation compliance, or with local laws, regulations. So the producer will complete that self-assessment questionnaire. That information is captured. This is just a brief snapshot of some preliminary responses that we had when we looked across the scope of the participating with producers on some of the soil health questions about conservation tillage practices. And for some of the producers that were enrolled in the trust protocol, we're seeing some fairly high adoption on a number of the practices that were identified. But as we look at some of those, particularly some of those producers that are considering this practice in the next 3 years, we want to use this type of information to inform us as to whether, those areas that we can target for continuous improvement. So this is just a very small snapshot of the data that we can glean from the questionnaire. One, to communicate back to producers about the results. A producer is going to be able to see how their answers compare to the average of other producers in their area. So it's going to give them a sense of, okay, where do they stack up? How do their practices compare to other producers? So we hope it's an educational opportunity for producers as well. The next major data component is, again, I mentioned the field print analysis. The field print calculator is a tool developed by the Sustainability Alliance known as Field to Market. The cotton industry has been involved, both the National Cotton Council and Cotton Incorporated have been involved with Field to Market since its inception a little over a decade ago. This calculator is an online tool that allows participant growers to input the data at the field level and compare their sustainability performance against state and national benchmarks. And the graphic that you see on the right-hand side of the screen is how those indicators are in one way that the indicators are portrayed back to producers. We refer to this as a spidergram that shows the indexes for several indicators such as biodiversity, land use, soil conservation, soil carbon, water use, energy, greenhouse gases, and water quality. The closer that blue polygon is to the origin or to the center of that spidergram is a smaller environmental footprint. So again, this is going to give producers some immediate feedback of where they compare to those national and state level benchmarks. A producer will enter this information on fields that constitute at least 10% of their cotton acres. We have developed within the Trust Protocols website an interface where the producer can put their information directly in. Once they're on the protocols website, that data will be sent up to Field to Market for their calculations, transmitted through electronic means. So going to the computer algorithm does the calculations, the results will come back to the producer. So we tried to streamline the data entry process. We are also working with a number of other farm management software companies. Those are known as qualified data management partners that some of our producers will be using, and those are perfectly acceptable as well, and they can capture the data directly within those qualified data management partners. So a number of projects that are going on where Cotton Incorporated, National Cotton Council are working closely with some of those qualified data partners with a goal of trying to streamline this process for the producer. We understand it's a time commitment, and we want to figure out ways to make that process as streamlined as possible. But I will say, as we try to tell our story and as we track continuous improvement, this is very important data that we have the ability to collect as U.S. cotton producers that really few other cotton producers around the world can collect this level of information and provide this level of detail. I think that gives us a definite advantage when we tell our sustainability story going forward. Verification, we've already talked about. It is important for the integrity of the program, and we are using a company called Control Union Certification for those verifications. That does include an on-farm visit, and really the purpose of that verification is to make sure that the producer answered the data correctly, that they are carrying out the practices as they've indicated in their survey questionnaire. So it's not intended to be a gotcha. It's not intended to look at anything on the producer's farm beyond the practices identified on the questionnaire. And if there are any questions, then there is a time to correct any discrepancies. But again, for the integrity of the program, for the acceptance of the program by the supply chain, and for continuing to build those markets for U.S. cotton, we do believe this is very important to have that independent verification. Supply chain enrollment, again, the audience for the data we're collecting, for the messages that we want to tell, for the demand that we're trying to build is that supply chain. And we are having now, as we look at an enrollment update, we have approximately 20 cotton merchandisers that have joined the program, almost 50 cotton gins. We have approximately, I think now the number is actually closer to 300 mills and manufacturers across the globe. So those textile supply chains, those manufacturers that are buying U.S. cotton have already, even in its early stage, since we opened up enrollment to the supply chain last summer, we've seen again almost 300 mills and manufacturers across the globe join. So it is getting traction, and most importantly, it's getting traction with brands and retailers, where we have about 30 that are either joined or in the process of joining. And we've been very encouraged to see the response that we have received from the brands and retailers. A few of them that you'll recognize if we just talk about some of the brands and retailers that have already joined. One of the big ones that joined at the end of 2020 was Gap and their associated labels that come with that. And we do anticipate, as we look out over the next several weeks, we believe we'll be able to announce some other brands and retailers that have joined as well. We hope that sends a strong message back to producers that this program can be beneficial. It can be beneficial for U.S. cotton to continue to make sure that we have the markets going forward. So again, thanks for the opportunity to provide a bit of an overview on the Trust Protocol. A lot more detail is available at trustuscotton.org. You can also reach out at the email address there shown on your screen if you have questions. And so again, appreciate the opportunity. Look forward to any questions and the opportunity to answer those today. So I'll stop sharing and David, turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I did. There are a few questions, Gary, and Jesse, feel free to chime in here too if you got some comments. When someone enrolls, they're just enrolling the cotton field. You know, most producers are raising multiple, diverse rotation. So they just enter that one field in, and next year they'd add the next year's crop or field, or what? How would that work?
That's right, David. If somebody is enrolling today, this is set up to analyze their cotton fields. So they would pick one or more of their fields that it would take to constitute 10% of their acres, and they would enter those. The next year, obviously with crop rotations, it's likely to be different fields that are in cotton production. And in the next year, they would pick those fields. I do think, the sustainability messages that U.S. agriculture is going to have to give, not just U.S. cotton. We hope that what we've developed here could be a template for other crops, because a lot of the management practices that our producers are doing on cotton would apply to their other row crops as well. And we know that most of our producers are not just cotton producers, but they're doing other commodities as well.
Okay. Now I'm looking. What does the protocol tell you at what point you're sustainable or what point you're not? I know there's 6 different indicator areas. So you may be good in 4, but not 2. So how's I handle that?
Well, it's good. That's a good question, and a lot of it is not to say, our objective is not to say, okay, well, only somebody enrolled in the protocol is sustainable, or these producers that are in the protocol are sustainable and these are not sustainable. That's not what we're trying to do. That's not the message we will ever give out of the protocol. What we're trying to provide to the producer is the opportunity and the data and the feedback so that it can help them on their sustainability journey. We don't see, I guess, sustainability as an endpoint, but rather a journey. And they look at where they're starting, and then they compare themselves, and then they can track their progress over time. And hopefully there's feedback that shows that as we move forward to next year and the year after and the year after, that environmental footprint is going to shrink, and it kind of moves them along their sustainability journey. But we never see it as being an endpoint. We see this, and we use this term a lot when we talk about continuous improvement. And we really see that as a core of the program, is to really focus on continuous improvement and what can we do in the way of feedback to producers to hopefully help them along that journey.
Okay.
And
go ahead, Jesse.
Yes,
if I may, that's a great answer, Gary. And one more point to consider: brands have their goal of reducing environmental impact. So, there's a wide range of how much impact you're creating. So what we want is to engage a wide audience of all levels, and again, as Gary mentioned, provide tools, information, resources such as these webinars to help inform and hopefully optimize their operations through time and create that change that the brands are actually looking for. They're looking for those improvements through time, those greenhouse gas savings. And it's not sustainable or not, it's moving the whole forward and to better. That's really what we're looking to do.
Well, that'll be my concluding question. How would a brand use information from the calculate or the field print? Cotton Trust Protocol. I'm getting them all mixed up here.
And we didn't really, David, get into the kind of some of the what we call the back end or the supply side part of this, but what we want to see is a system for the brands and retailers that as they pull cotton through the system, and they're able to take that cotton, those products that are produced out of cotton, and convert it back to credits, or bring it back to the amount of land that it took to produce those products that they want to talk about or they want to make claims about. Well, the data that Jesse talked about, as we aggregate up across the protocol and be able to talk about, the environmental impact in this year was this level, but by the time you source 2 or 3 years down the road, you're able to hopefully be able to make claims that by continuing to source protocol cotton, you're able to have a smaller environmental impact. Greenhouse gas emissions can go down, say, per pound of cotton. And that's really, I think, what we can help a brand or retailer is to provide that level of data, because Jesse made a great point about the commitments that the brands and retailers have made. So if we can help provide data that allow them to meet their commitments, then I think that is where real value can come.
So a group like Walmart would be able to utilize that information as part of their as Greg will be talking about, part of their strategy down the road.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's one goal. And one more piece to this is we certainly do want to speak towards and document our improvements through time. That is top priority. But let's not forget about all the improvements we've already made as an industry. I think there's a lot of terrific growers out there. We're implementing, a lot of great practices and highly sustainable in many situations. So I think start with, what are we doing now? We're already highly advanced. So certainly let's document that and communicate that through the supply chain. And I think that is a very big value today. And brands are looking for just that. And then let's now track through time. But I think it's worth noting that we're already at our high level already.
Okay, that's a great point, Jesse. And maybe we can expound on that a little bit. We have a group discussion there.
Good.
I heard from the industry or the folks that directly involved with the growing and marketing of cotton. Now we want to hear from someone who's at the other end, from the brand or the marketing side. And this is Greg with the Walmart Foundation. And Greg, appreciate your participation in that. If you want to go ahead and take over and share your screen there.
Sounds good. Let me know if you can't see or hear me, but I'm ready to go. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Bohrer. I'm the Director of Natural Capital at the Walmart Foundation, which is a separately incorporated entity from Walmart, the business. But we have underneath that all the charitable giving from the business and from the foundation we put under the banner of .org, walmart.org. And so I'm happy to be here today for a number of different reasons. One is because we're proud to be at the foundation a supporter and funder of the work of the Soil Health Institute. And we believe that this work is integral to the future that we want to shape in terms of regenerative agriculture. Thrilled by the work that they've been doing, these sessions, these webinars, and happy to be here on that. So thanks to Wayne, thanks to David. Just really excited to be able to show to you today why we're investing in the Soil Health Institute, why we're investing in the farmers that are engaged in that, and how that fits into our broader strategy of becoming a regenerative company. So I want to first say that, I don't think Walmart today is a regenerative company. I don't think if you talk to anybody at Walmart, they would say the same thing, because we believe this is a journey. This is a path to where we want to be in the future. And so this incorporates a lot of different things. When we say we want to become a regenerative company, it incorporates a lot of different metrics of success, from environmental to social to economics to the full supply chain to our future as a company, all those kind of things together. And it's important to note that all those things require continuous improvement. So we started off on this journey in the past, actually after Hurricane Katrina. So this photo at the top here is this massive line of Walmart trucks waiting to be led into New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, chock full of all the stuff that the residents of the area need, critical supplies just to be able to get through the next few weeks. And we realized that as a company, we have built a supply chain and a logistics back end that could be incredibly important to supporting our customers, not just every day when they go into the store, but when they are most in need. And Hurricane Katrina was a turning point for our company to realize, hey, we can be a force for good in some different ways. And so that led our CEO at the time to make a commitment in 2005 to sustainability. And that was where we really got started. Is we set some ambitious goals, and we got our foot in the door, and we've continued to open the door, right? So the most recent commitment that we've made is really tied into all these previous commitments that we've made over time. We developed an index for sustainable products. Cotton is included in that, and our suppliers report to that index. We set a broader vision in 2016 for Walmart's role in society through sustainability goals. Really big one that ties into some of the work that the Soil Health has been doing. Soil Health Institute has been doing is we launched Project Gigaton, which is a huge commitment around removing carbon emissions from our supply chain, and how that feeds into agriculture. There's a few different pieces of nitrogen efficiency and things like that. But we see that as an important component between both our climate goals and the nature goals that we've set here in 2020. So in 2020, our CEO announced that we're going to become a regenerative company, and that was based off of this a number of different indicators. There's a lot of things that are going wrong right now on a lot of different metrics. So let's start with the climate crisis, which we know is going to significantly change growing patterns across the world, so that products that our customers rely on now may not be able to be grown in certain climates anymore towards mid-century. So we, as a company that has been around for 58 years, needs to take that very seriously and think about, okay, how do supply chains maybe need to shift? How do they need to be regenerated and made more resilient? There's all kinds of issues with how we need to face the climate crisis, but it is one that we have dedicated ourselves in our supply chains and in our operations to doing so. We also know that we are exceeding our planetary boundaries on nature, and that's everything from soil health to a significant decline in most animal populations in just the last 45 years. That 68% decline should scare anybody, not just us who value the ability to go out and hunt and fish, but anybody who thinks of the natural world as being our baseline, the foundation that we stand almost all our systems on. Waste is on the rise. We heard about plastics, and there's an opportunity to, there's a crisis and an opportunity there to shift. And then also, we're not going to forget the social piece. That figures into this now. There's still a significant portion of the world that is trapped in modern day slavery or forced labor. And that needs to be addressed. And the power of businesses to do that is important. So all these things are crises, right? All these things are gnarly problems that need to be fixed. And it led our CEO in September 2020 to make a commitment to put Walmart on the path to becoming a regenerative company. And I'm just going to quote it right here because this is really the sum up of our entire position. One dedicated to placing nature and humanity at the center of our business practices. We're not getting away from our original vision. Our company was founded on Sam Walton's vision of helping people save money and live better, and that is still our tagline. That's still the core vision of what Walmart is and what we hope to be in the future. But what we're doing is we're going beyond just the upfront part of that and thinking about what are all the things that go into helping our customers save money? What are all the things that help our customers live better? And it's not just the lowest price on our product, although that's very important to us and will continue to be the core of our company strategy going forward. But it's also the idea that as we start to exceed the planetary boundaries in climate and nature, those products will become more expensive if we don't do something now. Again, we're a 58-year-old company. We're not a startup. We're a company that understands about building for the long term and making sure that the systems that we depend on are there for the long term as well. And that means investing in the natural capital that it produces our fiber, produces our food, produces our pulp and paper and wood products. All these things need us to think for the long term, because if we don't, in 10, 20 years, the price of coffee may be to the point where we can't really bring that to our customers anymore. It may be that cocoa is just not available. It may be that cotton, because it's a very climate sensitive crop, goes up dramatically in price and really impacts our ability to deliver to our customers on the promise of save money and live better. It's a long-term kind of vision on that same mission that we've always had. So what does regeneration mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And I'm not going to try and pretend that we have the definition. We have what we understand to be for our business, but regeneration really means about building back, right? Building back the prosperity, building back the productivity, and building for the long term. So when we're talking about plastics earlier, we want to build a circular economy where the waste doesn't just flow into the ocean, right? Like plastics can be part of a circular economy. It can be recycled, we can do things with that, but we need to create the systems for that. We need to restore, renew, replenish, and conserve natural resources that our systems are built upon. And it's not just about the soil that underlies the field that produces the fiber or the food. It's bigger than that. It's about looking at, say, fisheries across the Western Pacific and thinking, what do we need to do to make sure that those fisheries start to rebuild themselves instead of slowly deplete like they are right now? What is it that we need to do to preserve biodiversity and the health of the Amazon rainforest? Because that is such a driver of the global climate cycle. So what do we need to do on all these different things is really important. But for the purpose of this audience, I think it's most important to look at the bottom right corner of adopting regenerative practices in agriculture, forest management, and fisheries. It's a core piece of our strategy. Regenerative agriculture is where we want to get to. And I want to make sure that this group understands too that it's not just that it's not an unfunded mandate that's being put down on the supply chain. We believe that a regenerative system is good for all of us, that it results in shared value for Walmart, results in shared value for our customers, and it certainly results in shared value for the farmers that are at the base of that supply chain, where they're producing the crop that becomes the commodity that goes into our products. So we really believe that through the system, through building a regenerative system, we all will do better. And we're interested in ways to get there, which is again why we're a funder of the Soil Health Institute. So what does this mean in practical terms? Well, there's a few different strategies that we have. First, I want to be clear that this is a transformation of the system. It's not just biting little pieces off at the edges, but we fundamentally need to create systems that result in shared value, as I just mentioned, but also are self-feeding, right? That they build on themselves. It's not something that we continue to have to push for to create, but it's something that folks recognize the value of and help basically create a self-reinforcing flywheel, right? If you have to keep putting inputs into a system to get it to do what you want, it's not gonna. It's difficult to keep it going. But if you can build a system that is self-reinforcing, we will all do better for that. So again, systemic transformation. We want to lead through the business. We have a lot of different levers there. We have our private brands, and as one of the previous panelists said, we've made a commitment to sourcing 100% sustainable cotton by 2025. So that's within our private brands and those that we are vertically integrated in. But it's also working with our suppliers and asking them to do work in this area as well. Wrangler is a great example and one that we've partnered with for the Soil Health Institute. So a lot of different things that we can do through there, but we also need to fix the gaps in the system. There are things that business is really great at, and there are things that business can't really do. And so philanthropy, the Walmart Foundation, is where we come in and we look at the systemic gaps in the system. And we look to build those bridges that cross those gaps and help the system, the business and the suppliers and the value chain cross the gap and move forward to the transformation that we want. And lastly, I want to say we also collaborate with others. We're a big company. We're the largest company by revenue, largest public company by revenue. And that means we have a lot of levers. We have a lot of ability to affect change in the system. But it does not mean that we can do it alone. We need to work with our suppliers and our farmers and our partners on the NGO and environmental side. We need to work with everybody to make this happen. So to click a little bit down into our commitment to regeneration, I want to just point out here's some of the commitments that we've made underneath these 4 broad categories. For the purpose of this discussion, we're going to stick with nature. So the big announcement and the big commitment that was made in September of 2020 was around this commitment to nature, and it's to protect, manage, or restore 50 million acres of land and 1 million square miles of ocean by 2030. And cotton absolutely plays a role in that. When we talk about that acreage, we're talking about both protecting the systems for biodiversity, like the Amazon rainforest or other systems that are critical to ecosystem services, but it's also the productive lands that we're talking about, grazing habitat in the Northern Great Plains for beef, or soil health and fields in the American Midwest and Southeast, and where cotton is grown as well. And it's about trying to create regenerative systems on those acreage, on that acreage and on those square miles. And we also have a complementary to this, we have a commitment to source 20 key commodities more sustainably by 2025. Again, that's where cotton plays a role here. So we have made some progress. We're not starting from scratch here, which is kind of nice for the work that I have to do. We have a longstanding Acres for America program. That's really on the protect and restore aspect of it. We've funded the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for many years to go out and conserve and protect critical landscapes. And we've also moved forward on our commitment around sourcing different commodities in our private brands. And that includes coffee, includes seafood. We've made some really significant progress on these commitments. And as we've made progress, we sort of hit the reset button, we look forward, and we say, what is it that we need to do now? And so that's partly what the nature commitment is around. It's not just like checking the box, hey, we got 100% on our coffee and our cotton, but it's looking at the landscapes that supply those commodities and figuring out what we need to do there. So I also want to, this is something that came up in a previous discussion or a previous presentation here. There is a synergy between our work on climate and our work on nature. We believe that agriculture is a way to accomplish both things, both to preserve and protect and sustainably manage the natural capital that our agricultural systems are based off of, but in doing so, also make our commitments around climate and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And that comes through a couple of different pathways here. This is Project Gigaton. This is our big climate commitment to reduce emissions in our supply chain. And you'll see that agriculture is a pillar of that, specifically fertilizer optimization. But we are also looking at soil health and carbon sequestration as part of a way to get to our goals on that. So I just want to note it because it's important for how we look at the opportunity and where we want to invest. So these are all the different kind of crises that we're facing in different aspects of nature. I mentioned a few of these: coffee, cocoa, and certainly agriculture. We have to significantly change the way that we farm for the future if we're going to have productive systems into 2050, 2060, 2070. And it's critical. We can't wait at this point in time. I just saw a study that said that looked at satellite data across the American Midwest and the Corn Belt, and it showed that roughly 30% of acres in the Corn Belt have completely lost their A-horizon topsoil. If that's the case, that's the most productive area of agriculture on the planet, and we've lost a significant piece of that asset. And that's not acceptable, really, if you think about what we need to do as far as feeding a growing planet. So we have to build back. We have to not just maintain what we have to build back better the soil health and the productive capacities of these different systems. So again, we're going to continue to focus on protecting and restoring nature. We're going to focus on sustainably managing the assets that we have and bringing them back into line with what we need for the future. Beef, seafood, cotton, you see that these are called out specifically because these are a core component of that. But how we do that is going to look different in every lever that we have. Again, private sourcing and direct sourcing, private brand and direct sourcing, we're going to lead with that. We're going to ask our suppliers to engage with us. We had a little bit of a discussion about how that looks like with the Cotton Trust Protocol and other mechanisms. And we're going to invest where we need to in the capacity of the system to be regenerative. So again, sometimes that will be standards to increase strength and credibility for the different commodities that we source. And other times that's going to be investing in place-based projects, which one of the reasons we've invested in the Soil Health Institute is because this is a way to cover a critically important geography and the farmers that we rely on within that geography with information and access to research and all the things that are needed to make the changes that we would like to see in the landscape. So here's another example of another large investment that we made. We worked with McDonald's and Cargill to invest several $1 million in northern Great Plains around beef production. And hopefully by the time this grant is over, by 2025, we will have improved the health of over 1 million acres of grasslands, productive rangeland in the northern Great Plains. And at the same time, we'll have regenerated some of the systems around biodiversity and soil health and all those other things within that rangeland area. So we're working in a number of different ways. Our future looks like this. This is what we want to get to. And I want to just call your attention to a couple of different places. Top left, producers can grow their businesses and livelihoods. This is one where we need to do this in partnership with y'all. We can't do it alone. Walmart's big, but it's not that big. We need to work with those who actually manage the resources and have an understanding of what the soil and the farm needs. And we specifically want to do so in a way that sustains the productivity of that resource for generations to come, but also sustains the productivity of the resource for the generations that will come on that farm. That's important to us. So that's that. Again, thank you for inviting me to be here. And thank you again for the work that you're doing at the Soil Health Institute and for being a great partner in this.
Okay, Greg, thanks. That's really great to see a company like your all and the foundation involved in that. A couple quick questions here. I see you all will play a role in connecting farmers with the consumer. You know, I think there's a big disconnect, not just in, people walk through the doors of Walmart, but anywhere, go to local grocery. They don't understand where their food comes from, where their fiber comes from. You got any thoughts on how you might be able to help close that gap out there, since you all are spread so far across the country or different places?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm going to take a page from a different category, the seafood category. If you walk into Walmart and you go over to the seafood section, you'll see there's a big sign that says 100% sustainably sourced. That's going up in most of the Walmarts out there. And what that means to us is that a consumer may be at that moment in time looking for crab legs or salmon or tuna or shrimp or one of a variety of different products, right? And they're going there because they want to be able to make what they want to make for dinner. They don't want to necessarily have to think about, okay, if I make this choice over here, is it a worse choice for the environment than this choice over here, right? We're all pretty busy in our everyday lives, and standing in front of a case of product and trying to figure out this versus that, it's hard to do, right? We want to be able to get in there, get our stuff, and get moving. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that every choice that a consumer makes is a sustainable choice, right? So if a consumer walks in there and is looking for some sort of item of clothing, we want to make sure that no matter what they pick off the shelf, no matter what that pair of socks is made out of, it's a sustainable choice for the planet and for the producers that were involved in creating the raw material. So it's tough to educate consumers. There's so much out there, right? Fighting for the attention of the consumer and telling the story is really difficult. What we want to do is we want to make sure that it's easy for busy families to make good choices. And so if they appreciate that, if they look at that and say, hey, I was able to make good choices across my entire shopping cart, and they give us credit for it, that's great. They might come back to us again, right? But it's not, we're at the end of the day a retailer, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to go where the consumer goes.
Yeah.
We're going to choose what they want to buy. And it's up to us on the back end to try and make sure that all those choices are good for the planet.
Well, that kind of leads to my question about truth in lending or truth in labeling. What are you all doing? I mean, anybody can make a claim 100% that, because I don't see this going down the certified organic road where, that was a huge effort. What is Walmart doing, or what are you doing as a foundation to ensure that the customer, when you say it's 70% or whatever, or even what sustainability is, what are you doing to ensure that, I guess?
Yeah, we do have sourcing policies and for all these different product categories. And there are some certifications that are in and some certifications that are out. We work with our environmental NGO partners to make some decisions about that, right? Because we don't want to be accused of putting something out there that's not true or isn't actually sustainable when we marketed it as such. And so we evaluate the criteria of these different certification standards and verification schemes to make sure that we are delivering on our promise, because that's important to us. That trust aspect is very important to us. And you're right, there's a lot of different labels out there. And some of them we have direct control over sourcing in our private brands, right? That's vertically integrated, we make those decisions. But others, our suppliers who are making their own decisions, and we are having to work with them, right? So it's a hard question to answer, because you're right. There's a proliferation of different things out there, and they mean different things to different people, and some of them may be better or worse. But we're trying to navigate that as best we can, because at the end of the day, we need to keep the trust of the consumer.
Yeah.
And so making sure that we're credible and we're doing our due diligence is part of that.
Okay. Yeah,
I'm not going to pretend that we're perfect, but we're trying.
No. I would question whether if you did say that, that would probably raise a red flag. So I really appreciate that, Greg. I think we'll lead into more discussion we get here in a few minutes. And what your answer leads right into Dr. Honeycutt here, his discussion on what the Soil Health Institute's doing related to being able to help that maybe fill in some of the gaps. So I want to turn it over to Dr. Wayne Honeycutt, who I've known for a number of years, and I appreciate what they do. And all I got to say is when I started working with soil health, all you heard was, where's the science? Where's the science? And this was, 10, 12 years ago. And Dr. Honeycutt was involved, worked with NRCS. He said, well, there's a ton of science out there, but you got to look in different nooks and crannies. If you Google soil health back then, you weren't going to find anything. But if you Googled cover crops or no-till or or mob grazing or all these things that we're using to build soil health, there's a lot of information. So this isn't new, but the science is just new and a lot of things like that. So Wayne, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take over here.
Good. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, hello, everyone. Wayne Honeycutt, and I'm the president and CEO for the Soil Health Institute. And see a little bit of background. I used to be a researcher. I was a research soil scientist for USDA's Agriculture Research Service for some 14 years, and then a research leader for them also. And a lot of my research had to do with how different management practices influence soil properties and what we would now call soil health. And then after that, I served as a deputy chief for science and technology for NRCS in Washington, D.C. for about 5.5 years. And so one of the things we did there, working with Dave and others, so we stood up the Soil Health Division. So it's kind of a natural pathway when the Soil Health Institute was formed in late 2015 to try to help out there and just focus in on something on which I was very passionate about. So before I get going, I really want to go ahead now, though, and thank not only Dave, but also Jesse, Gary, and Greg for their excellent presentations. What I'm going to talk a bit about today is getting into, let me see, pull up my PowerPoint, is basically some of the science on what is really driving this effort that's going to really help us benefit both agriculture and the environment. Now, kind of the fundamental premise behind really what we're doing in soil health is that although there's always going to be more research that needs to be done, because, you know, as we learn more, then that leads to more questions and more knowledge, helps us advance things along the way. But we are in a very fortunate position, as Dave alluded to, for decades of research on things like no-tillage and cover crops that gives us that level of confidence that we need for moving forward now. And knowing that many of these same soil health practices that are good for farmers are also really good for the environment, by increasing carbon sequestration or storage in soils, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, reducing nutrient losses to our waterways. But it's really going to take our farmers and ranchers, those that are managing the lands, that are going to achieve these environmental benefits for the rest of us at scale. These are the ones making these management decisions on their land. And so I want to just share with you, that is really why producers and the adoption is really our overall goal, but producers are really at the center of our comprehensive strategy because these are the ones that are going to make the impact and bring all these benefits for the rest of us. So when you start to think about what does a producer need to know when he or she is deciding whether or not to adopt these soil health promoting practices or systems, of course, they're businessmen and women. And so one of the first pieces of information they need to know is information on the business case. Is it going to increase or reduce their profitability, increase or reduce their economic risk? They also need to know how to measure it. We need to be able to give them good measurements so that they can assess the current status of their soil health, but then monitor their improvements over time as they invest in these management practices to improve soil health. And it also means that often they need some assistance with some education and training. And that's really because all biology is local. When you adopt or adapt some management practice and a new climate, new soils, new production system, it often requires some tweaking and some adaptation. And so that's another important component of our effort, our overall strategy that we work on. Of course, over here on the far right, the research and development is one of those efforts that is multifaceted, but it really kind of backstops all of these things, the business case, the measurements, and the education and training. But even when we do all these and then we get greater and greater adoption, we feel like it's important we don't stop there, but that we really quantify the impacts of that adoption, because quantifying impacts on things like productivity, well, that ties right back into supporting the business case, but quantifying impacts on things like carbon sequestration and water quality, that really helps us inform our policies. And it also really kind of gives us the information that we need for educating consumers on these environmental benefits of the soil health systems, because really what we want to do is create more and more market demand for food and fiber and fuel that's grown using these soil health systems, so that is a more self-sustaining system. There are more drivers for food, fiber, and fuel grown using these soil systems. And so we're not as dependent upon federal assistance for their support. So that's our overall strategy. And we have activities, projects in each of these categories, each of these boxes here. I'm just going to touch very lightly on them, but not go into great detail because of our time constraints. The first one I'd like to just hit up on is measurements. There's been a lot of different good soil health measurements that people have been using for a number of years, but unfortunately they're different. Different people using different ones, and they have different interpretations in different soils and climates and for different production systems. And so we really kind of wanted to provide some I guess I'll go ahead and say it, some kind of sanity, kind of a wild, wild west approach out there. We really wanted to help standardize the soil health metrics for everyone to use. And so we have just completed a project all across North America where we've gone to 124 long-term research sites. The picture on the bottom here is 80 of the some 100 partners that allowed us to go to their research sites, where they have set up at each of those sites some type of conventional system compared to some type of soil health promoting system. And these sites have the appropriate experimental design to allow us to come to the appropriate statistical conclusion at how effective each of these measurements is. And so we have gone to each of these sites and evaluated over 30 different soil health measurements at each of the sites. And they were all sampled the same time, well over 2,000 samples and analyses. And it's quite a large data set. Our scientists are busy writing their manuscripts right now. They've got most of the data analyzed. It took a long time to get all the lab data in, but now they're writing their manuscripts. And so we will be in the coming months able to document, recommend what the most effective set of soil health measurements is for everyone to use, at least across North America. And we think it will extend beyond North America too. So that's a big one that's coming for everyone to use and benefit from. Information on the business case, of course, we've already talked about just how key that is. One of our projects is supported by Cargill, where we're evaluating on-farm economics for farmers that have adopted these soil health systems on 100 farms in 9 states. NRCS has supported another 25, and then we've been able just recently with some of our cotton farmers we're working with, been able to pick up about another 10 or so. And so we've got about 130, 135 on-farm economic assessments now that we're using. And so all of this, none of this is done for academic reasons. All of this is done for benefiting adoption of soil health systems. And so this is just kind of an example of the fact sheets that we've used. This is Iowa, where the 10 farmers are in Iowa. We compiled into just one fact sheet describing their overall, production systems and their overall climate, but then also doing a partial budget analysis on what their economics looks like and their change in net farm income that they experienced after adopting these soil health management systems. So this is more and more material that will be coming, but quite honestly, it needs to be done so much more widespread than this. Because, just think of California alone, there's like 400 crops in California. And so this is something that we need much, much greater effort in, but this is a great start, I think. In the education and training program, this is something that really kind of has been bringing you the Farmer Showcase over the last 8 weeks, supported by the VF Foundation, Walmart Foundation, and Wrangler Jeans. Our education and training program was set up to be a kind of a continuous engagement. You've heard the term a couple of times. I think both Gary and Jesse used it, talking about continuous improvement. And kind of the corollary to that and the match to that is a continuous engagement. Our approach is engaging farmers that are already successfully at adopting these soil systems and asking them to serve as mentors to other local farmers, and also engaging some local technical specialists, like from Cooperative Extension or from a conservation district, for being kind of that local technical resource, because we know we can't be there all day long every day, but these local people, they know the local climate, the local soils, the local conditions, and the local people. And so that's our approach with this. And it's actually quite amazing when we have like field days and have farmers, hanging out in the tool shed, talking about how they change settings on their grain drill, or, the different seeding rates, or when they needed to plant their cover crops by, what species worked best, when they needed to terminate them by. These types of questions that those of us in the science realm are not really providing, but those that are boots on the ground working directly with the farmers can provide. And it's really very, very rewarding. So we started off this in North Carolina, Georgia, and Arkansas in 2019, again, with the support of VF Foundation, Walmart Foundation, and Wrangler, with full intentions of also being on the ground in 2020 and expanding to Mississippi, Texas, and California. We know it happened in 2020. And so what we really needed to do then was shift gears and really try to kind of keep the momentum going. And so we did that by going virtual under Dave Lamb's leadership. He helped pull together some 7 webinars on soil health. Those are like hour-long type of events, but then partnered with folks in Arkansas, South Carolina, and elsewhere, on holding a number of virtual field days. And so there's some 13 virtual field days that are now available. And then the cotton covers, there's 6 cotton and covers events. And these, I love the most because there's farmers talking to farmers. These are our farmer mentors talking to other farmers about their experiences and walking the field. And they're just very, very informative. And then, of course, today is the 8th and final farmer showcase as part of this program. So in total, there's some 34 videos now that are available on the SHI website for you and others to view and to learn from, I hope. I also want to take this opportunity to let you know some of the other resources that are available on soil health through the SHI website. And there's a resources tab that has a lot of information, not just from us, but from many other entities. We're just really trying to compile them and put them in one place to benefit farmers and crop advisors. on best practices, on conservation, research, economics, et cetera. And then at the bottom, there is something called the Research Landscape Tool. It has like 13,000 references. This is something that we did put together at the Institute where you can go search. Let's say you have a problem. Let's say, for example, you have compacted soil. Then you can search on compacted soil, and then the different papers, some of them scientific, some of them popular press, will come up and allow you to access those. At least a summary of them. Some of them were behind a paywall, and we couldn't afford to go behind that paywall for everybody. So there's at least though a paragraph summarizing it that can give you a pretty good lead on a lot of good information. Kind of moving right along, you may recall when I showed you the comprehensive strategy, I said I'm going to go through box by box, and we talked about measurements and the business case and the education training. So here's research and development. We have a lot of things going on there, but this is just the one that I wanted to point out to you because we're quite excited about it. We've known for some time that when you increase the organic carbon in your soil, you can increase the available water holding capacity. But you know what we also learned once we started really digging into it was that a lot of those relationships were built based on going to different landscape positions. That's how the organic matter or the carbon was changing, because you were going like from a summit down to the back slope and down to the foot slope. It was not a management related change in carbon. And so this going to all these long-term research sites, these 124 sites across the US, Canada, and Mexico, allowed us to compare a conventional system with a soil health system, not only compare the carbon, but also measure the available water holding capacity. And then what we learned, of course, is then how things like sand, silt, and clay also modify or influence that relationship. So you can see, just for example, starting on that bottom curve there, 1% organic carbon, what your available water holding capacity would be depending on your clay content. But as you increase your carbon in your soil, now you're able to increase that water holding capacity and therefore build drought resilience. So what this has given us now is the ability to predict those changes in drought resilience that can be achieved from adopting these soil health systems by storing more carbon in the soil. So I hope you can see how all these different pieces now are tying together with what Gary talked about, what Jesse talked about, and some other drivers on looking at like some soil health parameters and carbon measurement parameters on the field print calculator and their tool. But then also what Greg was talking about with like Walmart's Project Gigaton, storing goals with storing more carbon in the soil, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So here again, this with farmers adopting these practices, this is how we can help the environment achieve scale. And again, this is a way that's really good for the farmer because this helps build drought resilience. Of course, there's many other ways too, like the carbon, when you build up the organic matter and the carbon in the soil, what's tied to that carbon are things like nitrogen and phosphorus. And so when you increase nutrient cycling, you're making more of that nitrogen and phosphorus available to the plant. And so you can increase overall nutrient use efficiency. You can reduce the amount of loss to waterways. In many cases, you can also reduce your inputs. And so all of these things are tied together. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox a little bit there. And just to kind of for the sake of completeness, talking about kind of rounding out all the different kind of categories in our comprehensive strategy. One of them is policies. We have cataloged some over 240 different soil health policies and programs at the state levels. The states have just really taken off on their leadership with adopting soil health and developing soil health programs and policies. And most of these, we just, again, compiled into a catalog so that people have access to it so that they don't have to start from scratch if they want to learn from it or emulate what another state has done. We are occasionally asked to provide like congressional briefings and things like that, which is something we really welcome the opportunity to do. Another thing that we've done partnering with National Sustainable Ag Coalition is evaluate the Farm Bill and how it could affect soil health. And we identified in the 18 Farm Bill some 63 provisions that could have a beneficial impact on soil health. And so we gave them a numerical rating. We provided in this is again, it's on our website. There's several pages here on the website where you can go in and find links to a specific a provision in the Farm Bill and what agency, is administering that particular provision, some cases who to go to. And the USDA agencies are really, I think, benefiting from this and seeing how there are connections to soil health that they didn't even really realize in some cases. Consumer education is also something we dabble in, not a whole lot, but we have provided a catalog of resources that mostly other people have put together just so that we can make it available to everyone. One of the things that we have done that's available, and I would hope that you could take a look at this, is we've developed a soil health documentary called The Living Soil. Now, over 2 million people now have viewed it. It's available for free on our website. You could also look for SHI's YouTube channel and find it there. It does take about an hour, so you might want to pop some popcorn, maybe sit down with your favorite beverage of choice and watch it. And it's really quite enjoyable. It's very pro-agriculture, very pro-environment, as is soil health and the whole concept of soil health. So I hope you'll check that out. So I want to just wrap it up just kind of by making a point here and showing a couple of examples of the fact that the opportunities here are limitless. I already really talked about, dabbling a little bit in how through like focusing on improving carbon storage builds water holding capacity and therefore drought resilience. And that's a way now that, organizations like Walmart can help meet their goals, and how we can meet like the Carbon Trust Protocol and score higher in that field print calculator. And so because all these things are connected, but I want to offer, kind of a couple of other things too. So here's the situation where we often grow different cover crops, and sometimes alone, but often in many different mixes. And then we sample the soils, and then we look at what happened in those soils, what changes occurred, like what changes occurred to the microbiology. But imagine a time now, imagine a time if we could really understand that microbiome, if we could really understand the microbiology in the soil and that chemical signaling that does occur, that has been documented to occur between the plant roots and the microorganisms in the soil. And if we could really understand that chemical signaling and understand that functioning, that microbial activity in the soil, now what that would mean for us in terms of us to basically design which cover crops we're going to grow, which ones we're going to grow together in order to achieve some level of pathogen suppression or some level of enhanced nutrient cycling or some level of enhanced carbon sequestration. So imagine what would be possible if we could really understand that microbiome. Think of what we could do if we really could understand the impact of different agricultural inputs on soil health. I really think a lot of that starts with understanding that impact on the microbial activity, microbial life in soil. And I'm just not talking about like the chemical inputs. Of course, we are talking about those, but also things like manure. And the organic inputs from the organic industry, conventional production systems. If we could better understand the effect of the agricultural inputs on soil health, then it would really help us utilize those tools more effectively in a more regenerative manner, more sustainable manner. Think of what is possible if we could better understand the connections between soil health and human health. And now what that would mean for more drivers, for more people that really demand that their food and their fiber and their fuel be grown using soil health systems, because they understand now that connection that it could have to human health. And think of what could be possible in terms of our ability in agriculture to reduce the effects of climate change. This red line across the top of this graph here, that's the current level of greenhouse gas emissions across the entire U.S. agricultural sector. Our models tell us that, according to this orange line here, if we significantly increase adoption of prescribed grazing on rangelands, And then now if we add to that nitrogen management on our cropland, we add to that cover crops on our cropland, and then down on the green line, we add to that no-till on all of our cropland. We could significantly increase the adoption of just these soil health promoting practices. We could, in effect, achieve a net zero greenhouse gas emissions for the entire U.S. agricultural sector. How are we going to do it? We really think this is the key. We really think that it's key that we understand enough of the science to know that what we need is greater adoption. And so it gets back to, again, to providing the information that farmers and ranchers need to know when they're deciding whether or not to adopt those practices and systems. So we really feel like that this strategy right here really continues to need to be built out, invested in, and made whole. And that the future generations, the environment, all of our economies, agriculture, we will all benefit from it. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Wayne. That was really a great presentation. I'm thinking of a dozen questions here, but one I want to ask, and then maybe open it up to the group here. The whole idea of being able to evaluate soil health, measure, like for carbon sequestration, this is where you are, this is where you are in 5 years. How do you see, can the Institute influence that? And especially with the long-term study, how do you see that playing out over the next 5 or 6 or 7 years?
Yeah. See, I guess I better open up my screen again to answer your question. We actually are really excited about this because what has really gotten in the way is a unified set that everybody can agree on, that the data shows, the research shows that yes, out of all these 30-something measurements we evaluated, this subset is the most effective. So we will be able to now recommend that. So now that we have that step, now our next step is to determine what the achievable level is in different soils. And then that gives us that opportunity to assess where someone currently is, but then also establish a target of what they can achieve. And we have actually established a process for that. We have piloted it in some of our sites where we were sampling those long-term sites. And actually with Walmart's support and also support of General Mills, we are piloting it in 3 other states right now. It's a concept we call soil health targets. And that through Walmart's support, we are also developing kind of a national focus that's going to basically allow us to group similar soils together, so we don't have to sample every single soil, but we can sample similar soils, categorize them. We can establish what a target, an achievable level is. And so this is where we see things going. Of course, this is what we see as a huge opportunity, because not only just for the sake of soil health, but because guess what? One of those targets is carbon. And because it's very, very clear soil organic carbon is going to be a critical, soil health indicator or measurement. But then it also now allows us to now start to model what our achievable levels are for reducing nutrient loss and to our waterways and so many things. And so because it's all tied together. So this is where we see it going and where we are really putting a lot of effort over the next, say, 3 years or so.
Well, that's really, as a conservationist, I really appreciate that, because it's the $100 question there, are we doing the right thing? And I think I'm excited about that, because I know a little more, it's cost effective to run some of these tests too, which is pretty exciting,
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, for the next few minutes, we got about 20 minutes or so before we got to close out here. I just want to ask a few questions of the group here, and hopefully everybody will feel comfortable to chime in. I'm a little concerned where we got soil health management systems, we got sustainable agriculture, and we got this new term regenerative. Are we muddying the water, so to speak, with too many terms? each of you see that playing out? Is there a way to help farmers navigate through those terms and where they all interlink and maybe even settle on something there? So I'm just curious. Anybody want to take a stab at that? That's a pretty broad question there. Yeah, I see Jesse's kind of rolling his eyes back in his head. You were going to pass the test one to Gary, but no, Greg, you got any thoughts on that?
I'm gonna take a portion of that because I feel like I can speak to some of it, and then others can chime in. So the regenerative piece, because I've talked a lot about that. So I want to be clear that, like, I don't think any individual practice is regenerative in and of itself, right? Like, sometimes the term gets thrown around, and I'm guilty of this as well, saying regenerative practices. That's actually not the case. What we want is regenerative outcomes and systems, right? So, like, going back to the idea of the flywheel, you're creating systems that build upon themselves. So when you're building soil health, so soil health practices, you can say that. But when you're building soil health, you're also building resiliency, you're building future productivity, therefore you're building future farm income, therefore you're building future economic resiliency for the farm, therefore you're building economic resiliency for the community in which that farm sits. That's getting to be a regenerative system, right? And that's a different, like, regenerative farming has a place in that, but there are many systems that interweave together, and you need to be focused on all of them to make sure that you are actually moving towards that not that endpoint, it's a journey, as we talked about before, but like you're moving towards that system that regenerates itself and amplifies itself and isn't dependent on outside inputs to make it valuable, but is in fact valuable because of its inherent value that it's creating.
Good. Yep. I appreciate that. What, Jesse, you got any comment or thoughts? Or
I would definitely agree that we need to look at it as a system and have regenerative outcomes, and improving soil health is one way in which we get that. And reducing tillage where it makes sense. That's one way we get towards regenerative agriculture, if you will. So I think just because you did one or several of those practices doesn't automatically mean you're regenerative. However, generally speaking, as you do more of those and manage your resources better, you can start to have that regenerative system. That being said, I feel your pain to the question asker. There is a lot of these terms, they're somewhat interchangeable. And I think that there is some nuanced differences between them. But a lot of times they do get stamped on kind of haphazardly. And that is to an extent a problem. And we're trying to have a more incorporated, and I think within the industry, have a more active role in defining what these types of words mean. For example, regenerative agriculture. We've actually worked with such organizations as the Textile Exchange to come up with a more comprehensive answer or definition of that. But I think there is a lot of uncertainty around what those words actually mean and how do we apply them. So I think the folks on this call, particularly the Soil Health Institute, certainly has a major role in defining what those words mean.
Gary or Wayne, either of you
Yeah,
have a comment? Or
I'd love to comment, but I see Gary unmuted. Gary, go ahead, please.
No, I just unmuted so I wouldn't have to say, oh, I was on mute.
Oh,
I have nothing to add. I'll
right.
agree though with Jesse that, if you're not a scientist and I'm not a scientist, all those terms thrown around can certainly get to be confusing in terms of what people mean and what falls in what category.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think different people kind of gravitate, right, to different terms. I think that in general, I think consumers are gravitating to regenerative ag terminology. But my experience is that farmers are really gravitate to the soil health concept and terminology. And it's obviously, it's because they see what they're doing to their soil. They know when they're improving it. They see the changes in it. And so for us at the Soil Health Institute, we really feel like that soil health is the foundation for regenerative agriculture. And that's really what we're doing when we're improving soil health, is we're regenerating the soil. And that's why our mission statement is to safeguard and enhance the vitality and productivity of soil. And because that's, that's just, for us, we see very, very little daylight in between, between the terms. I do understand that the concept of sustainability implies quite strongly that, it's kind of a steady state. You're maybe kind of staying where you are, where regenerative means like, well, no, we got to improve because we've degraded our soils. Just staying where we are might not be good enough. We look at, we are having heavier rain, we have an increased temperature, we have more drought. We need to improve. We have more people to feed. So I can understand that distinction between regenerative and sustainable agriculture. I do see very, very little daylight, if any, between regenerative ag and soil health, just because I don't think you can really achieve a regenerative system without improving the soil health. Two other kind of quick comments on it is one of our opportunities that we think, I mentioned a while ago, the concept of soil health targets that we are using now to help establish what the achievable levels are for soil health. We see that's something now that can be quantified because now we've identified the most effective measurements. So now we can quantify it. So the opportunity here is that gives us, that gives the industry, that gives consumers, it gives farmers an ability to now quantify progress towards achieving more regenerative agricultural systems, more regenerative outcomes. And so that's one of the great opportunities there. And then just kind of the last, I guess, kind of off the cuff comment that I would make is once I was in a conference in Paris, and they didn't like it that I was describing this as soil health. They wanted us to call it soil security. This was a couple of years ago. And I told him, I said, you know what? I said, farmers are really interested in soil health. If farmers wanted us to call it pea soup, then we should call it pea soup because they're the ones that are going to make the changes. They're the ones that are going to bring these environmental benefits at scale for all the rest of us. And so farmers are interested in soil health. And so that's what we're going to call it. And so that's kind of where I also come down on it.
That's an excellent point there, Wayne. We get so hung up on terminology, and I didn't mean to cause that. But and that leads me to the next question, Wayne, that came in is that, all right, we've heard 7 weeks of very convincing, compelling arguments towards adopting soil health management systems. What's it going to take, and what can each of us do as represent your groups to convince the farm community to take that next step? And so we see, this field behind me is a summer cover crop, where that becomes the norm rather than the abnorm. What can we do, like I say, from the cotton industry, and I need we kind of outlined that to help convince the rest of the community to join in and see that. So, any thoughts on that? I don't like dead space, so that someone go ahead.
Well, I'll fill it if I have to, but I want to give our guests opportunity. Jesse.
Maybe I could try to do something here. So to make that the norm, it certainly has to align, I believe, with grower profitability. If growers can't do it profitably, well, we won't have growers doing it, frankly said and done. So I think in a lot of cases, it is pretty well aligned with grower profitability to do these types of practices. I think there's still some research to be done to prove that. We do realize that when you change operations, you take on a certain amount of risk, both in maybe productivity as well as additional cost of perhaps using cover crops. So, I think there's an opportunity to prove that it works and to also mitigate that initial risk. Share some of that risk, perhaps from the brands that are encouraging growers to do these types of things, who have those goals to pull carbon down. So is there an opportunity to share that risk, make it easier for growers to start these practices, and make sure that if they did something like this and it didn't work, it wasn't ruinous in a financial term? So I think that's a really big aspect that the industry is looking towards to how we can solve that problem, share that risk, and make it more feasible, and hopefully prove that it is profitable. One more part to that may be emerging carbon markets, but that is still to be sort of seen, but that certainly has some promise. So I'll leave it at that.
Gary or Greg, you got any comments on that? Or
I think what Jesse hit on was it's got to be tied as well to the practices and to the bottom line. I mean, it's at the end of the day, farmers are going to be good stewards of the land, but they have to be able to do it in a way that makes them viable economically as well. And when we can demonstrate that linkage between the two, I think that's where we can send a stronger signal for adoption.
Greg or Wayne,
I think I'm good. I don't know if I can add anything to those.
Yep, I would just add then that it's the bottom line. That's right. I think that's dead on center. I also think that there's components of that show up in different ways, like building that drought resilience that can now show up as greater yield stability. So when you have a drought year, then even if you're not as profitable, you're more profitable than some of the others that weren't using these soil health systems. And so there is there are all these tie-ins, obviously, to profitability. But I think that there's these other aspects of it that, the fact that we really need to be able to develop our production systems to be more resilient to extreme weather events, to all these forces that are occurring. I know one particular farmer has said he used to be enough to no-till, but now he's getting such heavy rains that his residue floats off the field. And so, now, he's no-till is not enough. Now I need to have cover crops and stuff, and these other management practices he's putting in the ground too. And so all of these things obviously tie into profitability, but I would say that, it's kind of I think that it's important that we don't overlook these other aspects that are also important to farmers that are related to profitability, but things like yield stability, resilience.
And I'll just add one more part to this, and that I'm going to reflect, I think, my impression of this whole soil health webinar series that Soil Health Institute and David Lamb have put on. I think, frankly, I've learned a lot, and I knew a good bit coming in this, but I've learned a whole lot more. And I think that the sharing peer-to-peer certainly is a great route towards getting towards that vision that this is the norm. I think that, we can talk up here all day as industry professionals of how this is important, but I think hearing from growers what worked, what didn't work, and really teasing that out, and I'd say, David Lamb, you've done a great job at that on these conversations. I think more of this is certainly a stepping stone and a way to get us closer to that vision. But I think we'll have to be beyond this as well. But I think this is a great start. So thanks for your efforts on this.
well, I appreciate that, Jesse. It kind of brings a question I thought of during your presentation. The one concern that's come up is what works in Arkansas may not work in California. And we all know that. But how do we, working with groups like the EU, to ensure that they don't somehow skew the system to weight against California or Arkansas? How to, and I know informing ourselves, but I assume you all been involved with that kind of discussion, or who in the system is involved with that kind of discussion to make sure it's a fair playing field, so to speak?
I got a few thoughts, but I think Gary might have some too, but I'll start us off. I think that there is that momentum in the EU, particularly. They seem to be out in front of the pack in terms of making action and moving towards legislation. I think that we have to have an industry-wide presence to help guide the science when standards are created, for example. Make sure that they're based in good science first and foremost, and secondarily that it leaves opportunity for cotton to be part of that solution. That's a very high level of perspective. But then I think also one other part is, if we are silent and don't engage and don't tell our story, they're going to tell it for us. And generally it's not the story that is true or accurate or what we want. So I think by creating programs like the US Cotton Trust Protocol, they now hear us. We can now demonstrate our sustainability. We can now demonstrate our improvements through time and create systems that include that progress, that incorporate our solutions into their issues, into global issues. So proactive nature in telling our sustainability story is really critical to that.
Gary, you got any comments or?
Well, I'll echo that last part that Jesse said just about the engagement, and we're doing that in the cotton industry in terms of trying to engage, particularly groups in the European Union, and I can think of a couple, one such as the German Textile Alliance, that we want to get the U.S. Cotton Trust Protocol recognized in the work they're doing and in the standards they're establishing, and it does mean that we need to document what we're doing within the protocol, but it's also a documentation of the rules, the regulations, the requirements that our producers are placed under when they are using chemicals, and so that when they're farming in best management practices, we need to be able to tell that story.
Yeah, so you're telling the word to the producers is it's really on their shoulders to support this and participate in the Cotton Trust Protocol to help tell their story, to make their lives potentially easier down the road. Are there any other, like as the corn or the soybean folks, are they doing anything similar to y'all? Anybody aware of something like that? Or I know soil health transcends all commodities, but as far as something specific like that.
There's variations out there. Let me just put it that way. I know soybeans have been doing some things for a few years now that have particularly been, I think, trying to address some market access issues that they had in the European Union. I know the corn growers are also delving into various projects, and we've had conversations with groups such as Peanuts, for example, that are looking at sustainability programs. So I think across agriculture, whether it's crops or it's livestock, we all are feeling these pressures from the end user and the pressure from the consumer. We have to be able to document and tell our story.
Greg, I have a chance to listen to producers from California to North Carolina, and there's a very extreme difference between who's going to pay for this. Some people think it ought to come from you all, being the market and the brands, and other people think it's the only way they're going to make any money is by taking advantage of the cost savings by reducing inputs, that kind of thing. Where do you see this playing out? How can a company, are we going to see penny a pound or something like premiums, or is that realistic, or what should producers really be expecting down the road?
It's a great question, and it's one that I wish I had an answer to. That's not. It depends, and it's all the above, because it really, like, every crop is going to look a little bit different on this. But there for things that are segregated out and verified and traceable and things like that, there are some brands that are willing to pay a premium for that, right? Because it comes with trust and it comes with the ability to say, yeah, we did it. It's over there. Look, I've got a spreadsheet that says it, or a certificate that proves it. And that might be that, that's been a good route for some producers. You look at our organic, that has been a way to essentially capitalize off of that sort of, certification, right? And for some producers, that's been great. And that may also be the case for other certifications or standards that come along. But there's also the question of, like, is carbon markets going to pay? Are carbon markets going to pay for all this? My sense is that carbon markets may help, right? And this is just from the mind of Greg. So this is like, we're all trying to figure this out right now. It's a very hot topic. No one's sure where this is going to go. No one's sure what the pricing is going to be. No one's sure what that pricing is going to look like when it hits the field, or what needs to come out of that for the verification and measurement processes that always go along with these kind of things. Who knows? But it may help, right? At the end of the day, though, I think the value proposition that the Soil Health Institute especially is able to show is that over the long time period, these practices are beneficial in their own right. They have their own value outside of any additional market benefits that may come with the practices. They have their own benefits in terms of resiliency and productivity and all these things, and lower costs in a lot of cases. And so my answer is that, like, I don't think you're going to expect a big old bundle of cash from the brands for doing this. I just don't see how that's going to happen. But I do see that there are going to be a lot of things that maybe make it a little easier, right? And make it easier for farmers to, the return on investment gets tossed around a lot. It's like, oh, we got to make the worth the return on risk investment. And I think that's a little reductive because it doesn't incorporate all the other things that a farmer values. And so when I think of like a farmer choosing to make a change, I think of the return on risk, right? And if there are ways to reduce that risk and access the value faster and more and less indirectly and more directly, those are great. But this is a long answer to a short question. But my answer is really like it depends, maybe, and we'll see, right? But the value is in the practices.
That's probably a good place to end. I don't know if anybody else got closing comments, but add to that. But we've kind of come to the end of our time.
Well,
Greg, go ahead, Wayne.
I would just say not only thanks again to Jesse, Gary, and Greg for your participation today, but really big kudos to you, Dave, for leading this effort the last 8 weeks. We have just had so many people reach out with very high levels of praise for the program. I know it's not just been you, it's been a lot of great speakers, a lot of great participants, many of them that are online today. And but I think you were kind of the brainchild of it, and you were the one that helped put it all together and facilitated it. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you very much, Dave, for having to put together what I think has been a very successful program over the last 8 weeks.
Well, I appreciate that, Wayne. And it's one thing, like I said at the beginning, farmers are good people. They like to share their successes. They like to share their mistakes so others don't make them. That's a unique. I don't think you see that in a lot of other businesses. And they're just really wonderful people to work with. So this has been a labor of love, so to speak. And I see a couple of our Matt and Bill and others have joined on here, been great partners in Arkansas and everybody else in Mississippi. So with that, I guess we'll just say adios, and I appreciate everybody's participation, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.